Life doesn't always take the turns you expect. A year ago, I was thriving as an IT technician in Portland, Oregon. But when the company downsized, I was one of the first to go. After months of futile job searching and a failed attempt at freelancing, I found myself back in my small hometown, nearly broke and desperate for anything that would pay the bills. That's how I ended up standing in the dim light of a local diner, staring at a flyer on the community bulletin board. It read, "Overnight security needed, immediate hire, no experience required, Coleman's Mart." Coleman's Mart was a 24-hour convenience store on the edge of town. It had been there for decades, and its neon sign, flickering as always, was a familiar sight from my teenage years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work. The store's owner, Mr. Coleman, was an older man with sharp features and a distant demeanor. He didn't waste time with pleasantries as he explained the job. My duties were simple: stay in the office, watch the security cameras, and lock the doors after the last customer left. "It's an easy gig," he said, his voice low and flat. "Nothing happens most nights." "Why hire someone new then?" I asked. "Any problems lately?" He paused, his gaze flickering to the office door. "Not really. Just need someone reliable." That answer didn't sit right, but I didn't press. I was too desperate to walk away. Before I left, he handed me a worn manual labeled Employee Protocols. Inside, a handwritten note stood out in bold red ink. "If something unusual shows up on the cameras, don't leave the office." "What's this about?" I asked, holding up the book. Mr. Coleman gave a tight-lipped smile. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just part of the job." I wasn't convinced, but I needed the money. "I'll be here tonight," I said. "Good," he replied, his voice clipped. "See you at 10. As I left the store, a cold wind swept through the parking lot, and I glanced back at the flickering sign. For the first time in a while, I had a job, but something about it felt off. I pushed the thought aside. I needed this. The store felt different at night. When I arrived just before 10, the usual hum of daytime activity had faded into a tense, unnatural silence. The parking lot, dimly lit by a single flickering street lamp, was empty except for my car. The glass door jingled as I stepped inside, and Mr. Coleman was already waiting for me behind the counter. "Office is through the back," he said curtly, nodding toward a narrow hallway. He handed me a small ring of keys. "Lock up when you're done. Cameras are already running." He didn't linger. As soon as I nodded, he grabbed his coat and disappeared into the night. I stood alone in the brightly lit store, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above me. The office was cramped, barely large enough to fit a desk, chair, and the outdated security setup. A single monitor displayed 6 grainy feeds from around the store: the aisles, the counter, the entrance, the parking lot, and a storage area. I settled into the rickety chair and stared at the screens. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. A few customers wandered in and out. A tired trucker grabbing coffee, a teenager buying energy drinks. It was dull, but easy. I almost convinced myself that this job really was as simple as Mr. Coleman claimed. Then, just after midnight, I noticed something odd. The camera feed for aisle 3, where snacks and drinks were stocked, seemed off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Something about the angle or the lighting looked different. Leaning closer, I spotted it. A bag of chips on the top shelf wasn't where it had been a moment ago. I rewound the footage to confirm. Sure enough, the bag shifted slightly, as if nudged by an invisible hand. I frowned, scanning the rest of the screen. The aisles were empty. No customers, no staff. Just me. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the air conditioning had blown it, or I'd missed someone passing by earlier. But a nagging unease crept into my mind, and I couldn't shake it. Around 1 a.m., another oddity appeared. The parking lot camera showed a figure standing just out of reach of the street lamp's light. They were tall, wrapped in what looked like a hooded coat. The figure stood motionless, their face obscured by shadows. I glanced toward the window. The parking lot was empty. My stomach tightened. I checked the screen again, but the figure was gone. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the now empty frame. The faint hum of the monitor, the only sound in the room. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me. By the second night, I'd convinced myself that the events of my first shift had reasonable explanations. I was probably just tired, I thought, imagining things after hours of staring at screens. But as I drove back to the store at sunset, an uneasy feeling clawed at the edge of my mind. The store was as quiet as before. Mr. Coleman didn't stick around long. "Same routine," he said, handing me the keys again. His tone was brisk, his demeanor distant, as if he couldn't get away fast enough. Once inside the office, I settled into the chair and flipped on the monitor. The 6 feeds sprang to life, each grainy but clear enough to show the aisles, the entrance, and the parking lot. The first few hours passed uneventfully, but around 11:30 I noticed something strange. On camera 5, the storage area in the back, something had fallen to the floor. A cardboard box, its contents spilled out in a heap. I rewound the footage to see what had caused it, but the recording showed nothing. The box simply toppled on its own, as if an invisible hand had pushed it. I considered going to check, but Mr. Coleman's note flashed in my mind. "If something unusual shows up on the cameras, don't leave the office." I stayed put, but the unease in my chest tightened. Just after midnight, another oddity appeared. A man entered the store, dressed in a thick jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He wandered the aisles aimlessly, pausing to pick up a can of soda before putting it back. There was nothing particularly strange about him, except that I'd never heard the door chime. I switched between the feeds, scanning for him. The man was now at the counter, staring at the register, but the entrance camera still showed no sign of anyone coming in. A shiver ran down my spine. I turned to the window, peering into the dark store, but the aisles were empty. When I looked back at the monitor, the man was gone. A few minutes later, the parking lot camera flickered. For a split second, it showed a shadow darting across the edge of the lot. Then the screen returned to normal. My pulse quickened. I rewound the footage, but the recording was clean. No sign of the shadow, no glitch. As the clock ticked toward 2 a.m., the tension in the air felt almost tangible. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Around 2:15, a message popped up on the monitor screen. "Playback error. Reboot system." My stomach dropped. That message hadn't appeared the night before. I hesitated, then reached for the manual. Skimming through the pages, I found a section labeled Error Codes and Resolutions. Beside the error message was a single instruction: "Do not reboot during the night shift." I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. Something about this job wasn't right, and I was starting to think I wasn't meant to know why. The third night began with a quiet sense of dread. I couldn't shake the lingering questions from the previous shifts. What had I seen on those screens? Why was the playback tampered with, or worse, manipulated? When I arrived at the store, Mr. Coleman was already at the door, ready to leave. His behavior was different this time. His usually detached demeanor had morphed into something sharper, almost anxious. "Everything running smoothly?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He paused, his hand tightening around the door handle. "As long as you stick to the rules, you'll be fine," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Without another word, he stepped into the night, leaving me alone with the silence. I locked the door and headed to the office, bracing myself for another long shift. This time, I decided to dig deeper. The monitor was already humming softly, showing the familiar feeds. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but I noticed something strange when I glanced at the wiring under the desk. The cables connecting the cameras weren't routed to the store's security system. They disappeared into the floorboards, snaking toward the back of the store. It didn't make sense. Any normal setup would route directly to a control box or external server. But this was something else. I couldn't leave it alone. Against my better judgment, I followed the cables to a locked door at the end of the hallway. I had noticed it before, but it had always been marked employees only, and I hadn't thought twice about it. Now, it felt significant. The keys Mr. Coleman had given me didn't fit the lock. Frustrated, I returned to the office where the monitor flickered. An anomaly in the parking lot camera caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A figure stood just beyond the reach of the street lamp's glow, their outline barely distinguishable from the shadows. But as I stared, the figure stepped closer, their movements unnervingly fluid. I watched in disbelief as they stopped directly beneath the lamp, tilting their head up toward the camera. Their face was blurred, almost as though the pixels couldn't settle into a solid image. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they dissolved into the shadows. My heart pounded as I rewound the footage, but the recording showed nothing. No figure, no movement, just an empty parking lot. Back in the chair, I tried to steady my breathing, but my pulse raced as I noticed something on the feed for aisle 2. A figure was walking slowly through the aisle. Me. It didn't make sense. I was sitting in the office staring at the monitor, yet the grainy figure mimicked my every move. My hands trembled as I rewound the footage, but the figure was gone, replaced by static for a brief moment before the screen reset. I reached for the manual again, flipping through its cryptic instructions. One passage caught my eye. If discrepancies appear on the live feed, remain in the office. Do not engage. Discrepancies. That's what they called this? A faint creak echoed from the back of the store. My eyes darted to the hallway camera, which showed the locked door shaking as if someone or something was trying to force it open. I froze, unsure of what to do. The manual didn't cover this. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The locked door at the back of the store wasn't just an off-limits storage area. Whatever was behind it had a connection to the strange occurrences, and I needed answers. The hallway camera showed the door trembling faintly, as if something was testing the lock. I tightened my grip on the chair, weighing my options. The manual's warnings replayed in my mind, but the curiosity, no, the need to know what was going on outweighed my fear. Using the keys Mr. Coleman had given me, I tried each one again, hoping I'd somehow missed the right fit. None of them worked. My frustration was mounting when I noticed the hallway camera flicker. The trembling stopped, and the door became still. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw something shift on the parking lot camera. A figure had reappeared, standing motionless under the street lamp. This time, I could see them more clearly. Their features were distorted, as if the camera couldn't focus. But what truly unsettled me was their posture. It mirrored mine exactly, down to the slight tilt of my head as I stared at the screen. Then, without warning, the figure on the monitor raised its hand. In the same instant, I heard a soft knock on the office door behind me. I froze. The knock came again, louder this time. My hands shook as I turned toward the door, half expecting to see it fly open, but nothing happened. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I called out, "Who's there?" No response. The monitors flickered, drawing my attention back. The hallway feed showed the locked door swinging open, revealing a dark, gaping void beyond it. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen, transfixed by the impossibility of it. A faint, distorted voice crackled through the speakers. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, desperate. Suddenly, the parking lot camera cut to static. When it came back, the figure was gone. I checked the other feeds in quick succession, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it. My reflection on the screen, standing in the middle of aisle 3. Except it wasn't me. The figure moved closer to the camera, stepping into the harsh fluorescent light. Its face was mine, but twisted, its eyes sunken and hollow, its mouth stretched into an unnaturally wide grin. It raised a hand again, beckoning silently. The lights in the office flickered, and a low hum filled the room. The screen went black for a moment before a new image replaced the live feed. It was me, or some version of me, sitting in the chair, staring directly into the camera. I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, as if it were coming from inside my skull. The last thing I remember before the power went out was the sound of a door creaking open somewhere behind me. When I opened my eyes, the world around me was shrouded in silence and darkness. The hum was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. My watch read 3:15 a.m., but it felt like I had been out for hours. I fumbled for the flashlight on the desk, my fingers trembling as I switched it on. The beam cut through the blackness, illuminating the cramped office. Everything was as I had left it, the monitor, the manual, the chair. But the air felt heavier, oppressive, as though the walls were closing in. Steeling myself, I stepped into the hallway. The store's fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting distorted shadows across the aisles. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, as if the sound were being swallowed by the darkness. My first instinct was to head for the front door, but when I reached it, I stopped cold. The glass was no longer transparent. Instead, it reflected the inside of the store, like a mirror. I turned back, my heart racing. The hallway camera had shown the locked door swinging open, and I knew I couldn't leave without understanding what was behind it. My flashlight beam trembled as I moved toward the back of the store. The door was ajar, just as the camera had shown. Beyond it lay a staircase leading down, the steps disappearing into a pitch-black void. "This is insane," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But something compelled me forward. My legs felt like lead as I descended the stairs, each creak beneath my feet sending chills up my spine. The air grew colder with every step, and the faint hum I had heard earlier returned, vibrating faintly in my ears. At the bottom, I found myself in a small room lined with shelves, each one stacked with VHS tapes. A single monitor sat in the corner, its screen crackling with static. The hum was louder here, pulsing from the monitor like a heartbeat. I stepped closer, squinting at the tapes. Each one was labeled with a name and a date. My breath caught in my throat when I spotted one with my name on it. The date was today. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Before I could think, the monitor flickered and a distorted image appeared on the screen. It was me, sitting in the office chair, staring blankly at the camera. "No," I muttered, dropping the tape. The image changed. Now, it showed me descending the stairs, flashlight in hand, just as I was doing now. Then, the screen froze on an image of the back of my head. A chill raced down my spine as I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned, my flashlight beam landing on a figure identical to me. Its hollow eyes stared into mine, its mouth twisting into an unnatural grin. It stepped closer, raising a hand to point at the monitor. The screen now displayed a new message. You were chosen. The lights flickered violently, and the hum reached an unbearable crescendo. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the stairs. As I fell, the world dissolved into static. When I woke, I was outside, lying in the parking lot, under the pale light of dawn. The store was dark, its windows boarded up, as though it had been abandoned for years. My head throbbed, and my hands shook as I reached for my phone. The time read 7:45 a.m. I had no memory of how I had escaped, or if I had escaped at all. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw myself standing at the edge of the lot, watching me leave. I wanted to believe it was over, that I could leave Coleman's Mart and the horrors it held behind me, but the events of that night refused to let go. The first sign came a few days later, while I was sitting in my small apartment, scrolling aimlessly through job listings. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "You were chosen." My chest tightened as I opened it. The body of the email was blank, except for a single attachment. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. A video played, grainy footage from the security cameras at Coleman's Mart. The timestamp was from the night I worked there. It showed me, sitting in the office, staring at the monitors. But something was wrong. My movements on the video didn't match what I remembered. I was smiling, an eerie, unnatural grin, and my reflection in the monitor was grinning back. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart racing. It wasn't possible. None of this was possible. Over the next few weeks, the signs grew worse. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. My reflection lingered a moment too long in mirrors. On more than one occasion, I woke in the middle of the night to find my TV playing static, even though I hadn't turned it on. I tried to research Coleman's Mart, hoping to find answers. What I discovered only deepened the mystery. There were no records of the store beyond a vague listing in the local directory, and it appeared to have changed ownership multiple times over the years. Then I stumbled across an online forum, one dedicated to paranormal encounters. A thread titled, "Haunted Convenience Stores, Have You Been Chosen?" caught my eye. The stories were eerily similar to mine. People describing night shifts at small, out-of-the-way stores where the cameras showed impossible things. Some claimed to have seen versions of themselves, while others spoke of vanishing entirely, leaving behind only static-filled recordings. One comment stood out. "If you've been chosen, it never leaves you. It watches, even after you escape." My stomach turned as I closed the laptop. I felt eyes on me, as though someone or something was in the room. A week later, I found a VHS tape sitting on my kitchen counter. I hadn't brought it there. It was unlabeled, but I already knew what it contained. I haven't watched it. I'm not sure I ever will, but I've come to understand one thing. Coleman's Mart wasn't just a store. It was something far worse. A trap for those desperate enough to take the bait. Even now, as I write this, I feel the weight of unseen eyes on me. I don't know how long I have before it comes back. But if you ever see a flyer advertising an easy night shift at a convenience store, don't take it. Walk away. No job is worth what comes after.